Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another session. Um, Today we have with us Dylan, who there's a lot to say about. Dylan is a counseling psychologist and founder of Cognition & Co., the South African South African Psychology Student Network. Stellenbosch. He completed his professional training at the University of Pretoria in 2022. We're off to a great start. And was recognized as one of the Mail and Guardian top 200 young South Africans in 2021. Super cool. Dylan is a passionate advocate for mental health in South Africa and is dedicated to empowering psychology students and fostering community growth through transparency and support. It's an absolute pleasure to have you, Dylan. I know you have a huge platform with lots of people who follow you, and you're doing amazing work. So thank you for being here, man.
Thank you for having me, man. I think there's going to be a cool little chat, and hopefully the viewers can take something away from it.
Yeah, I hope so too. So today we're going to be talking about goals and goal setting, how we set goals, what makes good goals, how we can implement them in our lives, and just really having a discussion around that. And then we'll kind of weave in our personal story into the discussion as we go. So please feel free to leave comments and ask us questions. We'd love to engage with you as we go. And one last thing, I'll be putting some questions up on the screen that Dylan and I will be answering. And we'd love you guys to give your thoughts and feedback on those questions as we go. Right. So, Dylan, what are the areas of our life in which we can set goals?
Sure. I mean, you can set them in any space, really, right? But I guess there are a couple of defined ones. But I think this is coming at such a crucial time, especially, I mean, what's the date today? 23rd of Jan, right? Before we jump into these specific areas of setting goals, I just wanted to say, there's probably a lot of people that have set a goal as a New Year's resolution, right? And so many things happen in the first 3 weeks of January that most people out there that are watching this now and trying to get some inspiration or assistance along the way, they're probably thinking to themselves yeah, that goal, that resolution is already out the window. So hopefully what we can do here today is kind of touch on some of those things and see where we can get to. I mean, I think when you ask that question, the first thing that pops into my mind is just straight away in your career space, planning professional development, all those sort of things. But it's not limited to that. You can also see this in your health space, in personal growth. Relationships is a big one, as well as obviously your finances. I think those for me would be your top 5. And I think just spaces where I think we often set goals, sometimes a bit, ambitiously, and then often we find ourselves kind of falling a little bit short. I know that I've felt like that in the past.
I think we all have. And I love the way you sort of started. I mean, it's kind of what inspired doing this webinar is New Year's resolutions, new year, new me. How do I set some goals that I'll actually carry through and actually implement this year? Because I think we have all these good intentions, but we haven't thought of how to sustainably implement them. And I also think a key part of that is asking, and that's kind of what this question is supposed to be doing, is asking the question, what do I actually want to set goals in? What is actually important to me? And unless we do that work, we're going to set goals by other people's metrics of what's important.
Sure.
And I think that's a big risk factor for making some silly New Year's resolutions. I must drop 20 kgs. That's what'll make me happy. And it's well, maybe.
No, indeed. And with things like social media, there's such a comparative aspect when you see somebody else achieving their goals, and then you kind of sit back and you're like, oh, but I'm not getting where I wanted to, or like the steps are not big enough. Maybe you haven't set goals that are actually achievable for yourself or outline the steps in which you need to follow in order to get to that. And there's a lot of frustration, I think, that comes with this. And I think that's essentially why a lot of people then shy away from this, actually setting concrete goals for themselves, because it's frustrating, this process, especially when you move exceptionally slowly through them.
Yeah, 100%. The progress can feel frustratingly slow. Um, and I think what helps me is connecting my goals to things that are really important to me, which is kind of one of our other questions, which ties in the self-reflection and self-awareness part and sort of domains of wellness, if you want to call them that. And you were talking about, financial well-being as one of the things, or professional goals as being an obviously important area. And there's physical health, there's spiritual, which is super important to some people. There's your friendships and relationships. And I think for me, what I try to do is look at these different domains of my life and my well-being, and I set goals in each of these areas. So I'm not just like, oh, there's only fitness goals and I'm gonna run 10 kilometers this year or whatever. There's a bit of an even spread. Do you do the same thing? What's your kind of thoughts around that?
Yeah, I think for me, it's so easy. It's much, I want to say it's so easy. It's easier to set goals in things like fitness, in things like, where you can actually see a bit of growth and you can see that upskilling and that's the less fatigue that you get from every time you run, or like, you don't cough blood, the fourth time you go out for a 5K. So for me, it's easier to see it in that than it is in like a professional capacity, because I think sometimes that can move so much slower than that. It's easier when you are seeing those things. For me, I think that something that's also been important, especially since I started my training as a psychologist, is just finding what brings value to me in my life. Like, I know you said a similar thing now, like which directions am I kind of going in, and what do those things bring me value? Same thing for me, like with if I one of the things that I kind of unlocked during my professional training was this element of creativity. Now, we'll talk about our personal journeys and goals in just a bit, and I've got a pretty wild one, dropping out of university for. But so often, in the past, I loved music and I loved being creative and the arts and those sort of things, and I lost my way and my goals within that space. And during my professional training as a psychologist, my supervisors were like, we see this in you. Like, why aren't you nurturing this? Why aren't you setting goals for yourself in this space? So then I had to reflect on like, why, like why would this be important to me in this career path that I've chosen now? So it was actually like a linking and rejoining of different spaces and trying to see what I could come up with in that space.
Yeah, it's interesting insight. It's something that I guess I struggle with as well, because like my orientation is I can't be good at everything, right? Not for external sort of validation or whatever, or even for myself, like I'm not going to be a world famous guitarist and a professional surfer and president of South Africa. Like, I feel like I can't do everything just because of time. And I've said this in a lot of the webinars, like I've realized time is one of my most precious resources. So I have to do the work to figure out what is important for me so that I'm spending my time on the things that are important. Because like you said, music was an outlet for you and a creative space for you that brought you obviously a lot of joy. And if it's something that you should be doing because you really want to be doing it, then you got to make the time and space for it. But I also appreciate you go through these ebbs and flows where you're super busy in life and you're having to concentrate on different things. That balance, I think, works over long periods of time, but not always in the short weeks or months where you're focusing on something specific.
Yeah. I think there's also like, an element of we can set these goals for ourselves, but then they often seem so far away that we don't actually visualize what that'll look like when we get to that point. And I think that's a strong thing in terms of, um, in psychology, we use a lot of visualization, especially in positive psychology and solution focused, and in CBT. And when you can see yourself, it actually makes it somewhat easier to get to that. You're setting a self-fulfilling prophecy essentially. So often you don't see yourself at that point, or sometimes you see yourself when you've just achieved it and you're like, wow, I'm actually here. And that happened to me a couple of years ago. It's part of my personal journey story as well that we'll share in a bit. But I ended up running the Two Oceans, the ultra marathon, and I'd never thought that would be something that I would have done. And it was only after I finished. I ran 6:01 for that marathon, for that ultra marathon. Thank you. On my watch it says 5:57:58, but
I'll take it.
according to gun to mat timing, I was 6:01. But it was only afterwards that I sat down and said, I just did that. And if I was to look back to where I was just 2 years ago, like that's never something I would have achieved, And I didn't even visualize myself getting to that point. It seemed I was still being held back by who I'd been when I first set the goals, and I'd not actually moved up progressively with it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That kind of connects to one of the questions we want sort of the viewers to kind of think about for themselves. And it's this visualization is imagined future self that you want to be, which is part of the self-reflection and activity. It's like, okay, well, what is important? Is it getting married and having 2 kids and a picket white fence and a dog? And if that's the thing that you say is important, how do you move closer and closer towards that? Because you can't imagine this future self. It's hard to make a plan to move in that direction. And look, I use like a sort of stereotypical example, like getting married, having 2 kids, whatever. But obviously, this is a fun activity. I ran a marathon last year with my fiance, something I never thought I would have done if you'd asked me a couple of years before. So there's obviously this flexibility, but I think some of my goals are things that I just pick up along the way, and it's like, oh, this would be a cool thing to do, and then that's awesome, and other things are this larger plan for life that is obviously constantly changing too. But I try to like gamify it and make progress through these goals. And the thing I've noticed is I sometimes don't spend enough time with the visualization part, because sometimes it feels a little bit like airy fairy to me, which is bad, because I can't put up this mental picture in my mind of what success looks like, and how I will feel when I get there. So I kind of, sometimes it can feel like I stumble into the achievement or set the goal or direction a little haphazardly. And then I'm like, oh, okay, well, now I've done it and I've achieved it. Like, oh, I guess I should celebrate it. So that can be a little bit dangerous.
I think that celebration aspect is really important too, because so often we do achieve our goals and we don't spend enough time being like, wow, I actually did that, right? I mean, I'm sitting with that exact same like dilemma at the moment, right? This not I don't know, not celebrating the excitement that comes with these things. Like today I got my registration sitting right above me here, and like what thank you, what should be, I mean, the actual thing came through a couple of days ago, but the actual certificate arrived today. But like I want to celebrate this thing, like, but I've got a million other things going on. So it's actually like I have to dedicate time to celebrating a goal that I've achieved. And essentially I've been working on this one since 2011, right? There should be a wealth. I mean, there should be champagne going. There should be like, people doing the can behind me, like all these things. But I've got a million things. And I think what what kind of sucks is that when you do set a goal and you start getting closer to achieving it and you realize it becomes achievable, then all of a sudden you're like, I need to set a new goal. I need to set something for the future. I need to lock something in. I need to start visualizing this. I need to, and then, your huge pedestal that you expected to step onto and have like this massive round of applause is essentially just you having a chat with Daniel here, and he claps for you when you get your registration. No, I'm kidding. It's an active process. That's what I'm trying to say. Like you actively need to acknowledge these things, and you need to celebrate them and do that. There's a model that we use in community psychology called PERMA, and the last part of that is acknowledgement. And I've seen it firsthand when you work with communities of people. When you acknowledge how far they've come, like it's absolutely incredible. It's like revelation for them, because oftentimes they're not focused on the goals that you have set for them, and that you've been helping them strive towards. And then you can show them, hey, look where you started and look where you are now. It's lovely, right? We do that with ourselves every day, but then we just don't actually give ourselves that acknowledgement. So yeah, spend that time. Actively do it. I think it also then helps you be like, well, that was really nice and that felt really good for me. Like the intrinsic motivation that came with this of achieving my goal is then, something I want to feel again in the future. So I'll set new goals and I'll work towards them, and then I'll reward myself again, right? And some people, maybe they need an external reward. Maybe they need to buy themselves something nice, or a slice of cake, or a new car. I don't know, something, right? We're all different and we have different size wallets. But acknowledge those things. I think it can go a long way in terms of solidifying goal setting into your life and following through with goal setting in your life.
100%. The takeaways there for me is that I should probably more deliberately include a celebration in the goal setting process. Like, okay, well, what will the celebration look like? What will the reward look like for this thing? And it doesn't have to be a car or a holiday to Hong Kong or whatever, because as you know, that's not on the cards for now. I think that's super important. And there was a guy who I had on for another webinar who his advice was like, he has a bottle of champagne and he writes the goal or achievement on that he's working towards, and he kind of like keeps it on the shelf and you see it, and then like it inspires you each day to be like, oh yeah, I'm working towards that thing, and I should probably do something like that. But the other thing that I thought of is, or that I acknowledge, is that the achievement, the standing on the stage or the getting the diploma that you can put on your wall, that moment of celebration is such a short part of it. 99.9% of the goal is the doing. It's the process.
Yeah.
And that's where the meat and the joy is supposed to be found. Like if you set a goal, be like, I'll be happy when I reach this thing. Look, maybe it does work for most people, but if that's like less than 1% of the time, that's hard. You've got to enjoy the process, and I guess reward yourself and celebrate the progress you make as you go through the motions.
Yeah, I think that's something that I picked up along the way in my journey through academia. I've been studying since 2006. I matriculated 2005, and I've been studying basically ever since, except for the time that I was applying for my master's. And when I started, I hated studying. I thought it was the worst thing ever. But over time, I started to develop this love for learning that I think is so important, and it really, really helped me, do better in my academics. But it's exactly like that, right? So often I waited to get that piece of paper that said, you've got a degree. And I mean, you walk across the stage, they, shake your hand, they do something with your hat. And then all of a sudden, it's done. Maybe you take some photos with the family and stuff, but it's a day. If you don't love the journey that gets you to that point, like you're going to spend a lot of time really sad for that tiny little one day of joy, So if it's like any of you guys that are watching this, if you haven't read The Alchemist, like that's going to teach you a lot about loving the journey, and like that it's not necessarily always about the destination, and just put into such a lovely book. I mean, fantastic. But Yeah, Daniel, you're completely right there. I do think that it's so important that we almost, it's the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, right? Like you do it for the love of learning, or the love of achieving, or love of being in that journey, rather than essentially just getting to the destination, putting your hand up and saying I've done it. It's tough. It's tough finding that balance, because some people also, they love that external validation to say like, hey, I did this, and I'm going to show the world. And I think social media makes that quite easy too, but you can also get quite lost in that as well. And not every post is going to get 10,000 likes, but you're kind of striving for that sort of thing. But that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah, that is a long conversation, and I think we all sort of sit in this um, between completely intrinsically motivated and completely extrinsically motivated, and we all got to navigate the balance. How much do we want to tell people and celebrate, and how important is that for us, and the goals and resolutions that we set in life, and how much of it is just for us. I don't think there's a secret recipe there for ideally setting goals. There's another question I kind of want to think about and discuss, is why people might struggle with setting and achieving personal goals. Like, what are some of the barriers that people often struggle with?
Yeah, so I think, right off the bat, I think fear of failure is one that keeps people from setting these things and even achieving them. I think worrying about not succeeding can prevent, people from even just starting the goal altogether. You see it a lot now, beginning of the year. A lot of people rushing to Virgin Active on the 1st of January, but there's a lot of people that are also like, oh, I know that by the 15th, I'm not want to be going back to the gym, so I'm not even going to bother. And I think when that fear of failure sets in, it's quite debilitating in terms of that. I know I've felt like that about a number of things. Recently, I tried to redesign my website, and I had a basic understanding of web design, but I kept delaying it over and over and over again, because I was like, I'm going to screw this up. Like, I'm going to ruin this thing, and I can't even then go back to the old website. So I was so scared that I was going to screw it up that I didn't even want to start. But then small steps, we'll talk about that in a bit. I think lack of clarity is something that's also, people have these vague or undefined goals, and we'll speak about that when we unpack the SMART method of doing this. But I think when you have a vague goal that's set, like, how do you actually measure the progress? How do you say that I've taken a step towards it when it's so broad? Any step essentially would be a step towards that goal. Oftentimes, I think that feeling of overwhelm, you set a goal that's just too big, or like not actually achievable, or you can't see or determine the concrete steps that you need to take to get to that space. It just looks like you're staring at a wall, and that's, you're not going to climb it, right? So I think that also can be one. Probably one of my favorite ones, procrastination. I like to put these things off. I like to wrap my head around it and come up with 10,000 steps before I even take that first step. But then I realized that, I've wasted precious time. And as you mentioned earlier, like, time is such a valuable commodity for us that, like, by the time you actually get around to doing one of these things, if you've wasted a year, that's a year less you're going to spend sitting on top of that pedestal, maybe, or working towards your new goal, because, the journey is more important. Finding other things to do instead of doing what you're supposed to do is probably one of my top skills. I think obviously competing priorities would be something as well. Life has a number of different demands, and I think this is something that is so difficult to balance, especially young adults moving into professional spaces, and then pair that with a relationship, pair that with a social life, pair that with your career goals and maybe health and fitness goals, and all these things together. And then all of a sudden you're like, hey, I found this new hobby, and you're like, oh, it's another thing that so that I think is probably one of the things that pulls us from pillar to post, when it comes to these sort of things. And all of a sudden, that goal that you set and you were working very nicely towards now has shifted over, and like you've actually gone back 10 steps because all of a sudden, hey, there's a baby, like crib inside my spare room, that's going to have an impact. And then I think finally, just no system of accountability would be the last thing that I would say there. Without somebody or something to kind of track your progress, whether you setting it personally and like kind of monitoring it along the way, I think goals can just fade into the background a little bit. Hopefully that helped answer that question.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, you really discussed a lot of different barriers or issues that a lot of people struggle with: competing interests, time. There's like a lot of cliches that came to mind where you were saying or explaining the challenges that you can think of, like don't let perfect get in the way of making progress, was one of the cheesy ones I thought of. And I think people are afraid to start because, what if it's not good enough? And I know we're going to go into how to set SMART goals and how to make your chances of success better. But I think one thing to consider is that we can always adapt and adjust our goals as we go. Like, we might have made it too easy in the beginning, and then we lose interest. Or if we make it too hard,
that's really good.
We can adjust the goalpost, and I find, like, I still do it. I set an unrealistically high expectation on myself, and then I get frustrated when I don't meet it. I kind of like beat myself, and it's like the assumptions I made when I was setting the goal or what I wanted to achieve with my life was flawed. So I need to reevaluate. And I think this is kind of one of the things I wanted to discuss just before we move on to the SMART goals. Is what are the biases that we have that affect setting realistic goals? And the ones that I kind of noticed in myself is a sort of all or nothing, black or white kind of thinking, which can show up in interesting ways. Like, you'll never be able to do this, you'll never be able to achieve this, don't even think about it. Or it's not working now, so it'll probably never work. Sometimes it's a timing thing. And one of the other biases I think I personally fall prey to is I don't aim high enough. Like, why not me? Why can't I achieve that thing? Why can't I make progress towards this goal? Who said that I can't? I said that I can't. I told myself, and it's a nasty habit. We pick up these negative self-talk and thought traps that we carry with us, and to dismantle them, like why can't you be the best psychologist in the world? There's no reason. If that's something that you want to do, set that goal, work towards it. But it's hard to break these biases down, man.
I think, so often they're kind of locked in from our childhood even, so it's not like you're just deconstructing just one thought pattern. It's something that has possibly even been passed down like generation to generations, like generational trauma that we lock in terms of these cognitive biases. So yeah, I mean, there's a bunch that come to mind, and you've stolen a couple of mine already that I had thought about just before this, but it's okay. I'll still talk about them because I did write them down. I'm kidding. If I procrastinated and I did it last minute, I'm kidding.
I wouldn't blame you.
Yeah, no, I feel the same way. I think the one that you're kind of addressing, there's like a bit of an imposter syndrome, like, why not me? Like, why? I guess there's two sides to it. There's like that why not me, but there's also like, I'm now working towards this goal, but I also don't feel like I don't deserve it, So there's two sides to that coin. I think that catastrophizing is one of the things that holds us back all the time. And this is just kind of blowing things into the worst case scenario, like out of proportion, like making mountains out of molehills. And I mean, you see this especially when people are, for example, their goal is to stop smoking, for example. Then they're like, okay, they go out with like on a Friday night with some mates, and like one of the guys is smoking. So you're like, oh, okay, cool. You grab a cigarette and you have a puff, and then all of a sudden the next day you're like, oh, I threw away 3 weeks of hard work. Oh, and then you go buy a box, and then you buy another box, and then you buy a carton, and you're like, oh, I've screwed this up completely. So I mean, if you see that as something as like just a slip up, or like, hey, I fell off the wagon for like an hour, like that doesn't reset all the progress that I've made in terms of where I'm trying to get to, it's absolutely fine, but so often we view things in that way. The all or nothing thinking, I think, is another bias that you've mentioned already, that if you don't get perfectly there, if you don't achieve that goal in exactly the way that you had outlined it in your journal when you were 8 years old, to say you're going to marry, I don't know, who did I like when I was 8 years old? Probably no one. No, man. Like Kerry McGregor. Had goals of marrying Kerry McGregor. Now, one of my best mates from school teaches her kids. Like, it's crazy. They have parent-teacher meetings with Kerry McGregor. Anyway, but if you don't meet that perfectly, that you've failed, and like, I didn't marry Kerry McGregor. I married essentially what would be better than Kerry McGregor for me. So we got to adjust. So if it doesn't work out perfectly 100%, or even if the journey doesn't take as short as you hoped, or is taking longer than you thought, or I didn't reach this like midway point by this time, that I've got to just drop it, so I think that's in there. And then just the last one being something like overgeneralization. So like taking one setback and projecting it onto the future as well. So like, oh, I fell off the wagon once before. This is going to happen again if I try to set this other goal, maybe in a different space, so I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah. There's so many of them that we might encounter. And, I encourage people to go Google them. There's lots you can learn about them. And I guess once you start to know what they are, you can start to identify them and hopefully try to challenge them. It's obviously something we've got from our childhood, as you said, and we pick them up along the way. But if we don't challenge them, we're limiting ourselves, right? And we're giving up on things, and we're throwing away progress that is important to us. The whole process of making our way through life. Without faffing too much, I guess we can move on to SMART goals. So a lot of people have heard of SMART goals before, and it's a super useful tool for setting like really smart goals. I know. There's
the pun's there for a reason,
Oh, I know. I mean, the person who came up with it was probably quite smart.
End the webinar there.
Down.
It's done.
Yeah, it's done.
Said all we need to say. Cheers, guys. It's been great. This is Dylan Benyon, Daniel Page. We'll see you on another night. And then the carte blanche music plays.
How do you know Sunday's over? Yeah, carte blanche.
Yeah.
And not to derail any further. So what I like about SMART goals is when I was doing my PhD, my supervisor, Stephanie Hanrahan, or Professor Stephanie, she introduced me to sort of her take on it. And so she had these like 3 additional P's that she included in it. So I'll explain her version. So for the S in SMART, it's specific. So you have to get like quite detail oriented on the goal. If it's too vague, it's not going to work. Like lose weight is not specific. How much? 1 kilogram, 100 kilograms, Then the next one to help with that specificity is measurable. How are you actually going to measure that you're making progress on your goal? Whether it's using a scale or a tape measure or a timer if you're sprinting, or a grade on a test or whatever, blood test where something you're measuring. Then there's the A. Her version is actionable. What are you actually going to do to make progress on that goal? And obviously, there's a whole bunch of different actions you can take. So if we use wanting to get quicker at sprinting as an example, actions could include, setting specific days that you train on. It could include making sure that you have a good sleep schedule. So there's kind of these, like, obviously step sub goals or actions that you have to take that you apply at different times. Very few goals is like you do one specific thing and that'll make it work. So the A is, what are you actually going to do? Then there's the R, so realistic. Is this goal actually achievable? The example I often think of where when I explain it to people is like, if your goal is to sprint faster than Usain Bolt, maybe reevaluate. Like, the chance is small. Like, maybe you're a pro athlete or whatever, but
That'd be
set the
pretty cool. I
goal.
mean, congrats, but
Yeah, I mean, you did your ultra in, like, almost 5 hours. So I mean, it's probably possible for you.
I don't think so. I was a much younger boy at that time. I was younger than you are now, even. Like, no, it's not happening for me. I'm okay with the fact that I will never be, a 90-minute half marathon guy.
You come to terms with it. Maybe there's some
Yeah.
cognitive biases there you need to reevaluate. Putting yourself down.
I'll take it to my psychologist and see what we get to.
Fair enough.
Generational trauma.
Yeah, limiting your running. So the R is realistic. Is it something that you can actually achieve? Because if you set the goal too high, then you're going to be demotivated. If you set the goal as being too easy, then it's just going to feel like, oh, it doesn't matter. Then there's a T, time-based. How long is it going to take you? How can you break this big thing, whether it's doing your masters or training for a race? How many months do you need to train for it and sort of like space it out? So most people know those. And then there's the 3 Ps. So the one is personal. Is the goal important to you? Because if somebody else is telling you, you should set this goal, this is important, man, it's not going to last if it's not something you care about. Then there's positive. Is the process something that you can see improvement in? Like, it's additive, it's positively framed, rather than negatively framed. It's sort of like a punishment goal. Because framing it in the positive makes it so much easier to work on it and make the actionable elements to it. And then the last one is performance-based or process-based. So as we were talking about it, it's the 99.9% is the process, and if you're so fixated on like, oh, I must come first, if you come second, still super good achievement. But if you lose yourself in that, you might be like, oh, well, then it wasn't worth it, which I think is also a dangerous sort of way of thinking about goals. And this framework is super helpful in many ways, is that it sets goals that we're far more likely to stick with. And we can adapt them as we go, because a lot of the barriers and challenges that we have with goals in the implementation or execution or stopping, it's often because we didn't set the goal in a way that was easy to actually do. It was too vague. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Dylan.
No, I think lovely. We have the same SMART goals in terms of our definitions, and I really like the 3 Ps that you've added to it as well. When I was walking around the house earlier, and I was kind of thinking like, how would I take that a step further? And I really like what you've done there. But I have another P to add to that, and I think patience is one that is exceptionally important when it comes to goal setting and getting and achieving your goals, right? Because I think patience the more that you're impatient with your goals, the more likely it is that you're going to withdraw from it and maybe move into another space. And sometimes these things take a long time, and sometimes the growth that you want to see is actually not limited by yourself and your own ability to work through that process. So it's not linked to your own performance. It actually has external factors, and sometimes you just have to sit and wait. And that's the only way you're going to get through it, right? There's nothing really that can be done. You can do all the personal reflection and stuff on the outside, and yes, that's going to contribute in the long term, but the actual stepping from step A to step B is held back by something else. I experienced that when it came to applying for masters in South Africa. The universities take very few students per category, per university for the various master's programs for psychology. 6 is the number, right? Which means that the thousands of students that are applying every year, not everyone's going to get in, even the ones that are like very deserving, right? So I'd set this goal to be a psychologist, and I needed to get there. And I thought that my goal was pretty specific, measurable, achievable, relatable, time bound. But unfortunately, like, something that I feel like I needed to learn along the way was this element of patience, because I wanted everything to happen right now. Like, I was capable within myself of moving through those stages as quick as possible, right? Got through everything as quick as I needed to. But there's this element of like patience where I needed to learn it. And that was the reflection that I took away from that, which has now contributed to me being perhaps a more patient individual in my personal and professional life, which is helpful, because sometimes I think clients can be, quite difficult, and you need to be patient with them. They don't maybe work as fast as what, I do when I go to therapy. And that can be frustrating for me. But now that I've sat with this and I've learned patience over time, I feel like I can do that now. So sorry, that's a very specific example. I don't really expand much on the SMART goals themselves, but I do think that the biggest element and another P that we got to add to your model there is this idea of patience.
I love that. And it kind of connects with one of the questions we wanted to discuss around what strategies can help you overcome challenges or practice self-compassion when facing setbacks. And your patience P that you want to add is that self-compassion, right? It's acknowledging that circumstance or environmental things or luck plays such a big role often in success and achieving our goals. And we're not in control of that, COVID can come along. There can be a death in your family or in your circle, and you just have to adapt and not beat yourself up because things didn't turn out the way you expected in the time you thought they would happen, right?
100%.
And I think some of that is like adjusting the goal and being kind to ourselves. But sometimes I think it's also letting go of who we thought we were going to be in the time we thought we were going to be. And the balance between that is hard, especially, what you were talking about, students trying to get into master's program, which is so competitive. I'm sure lots of people who are passionate about mental health and want to become psychologists have this internal thing of like, how much time do I dedicate towards upskilling myself, volunteering, doing this degree and that thing in the hopes that eventually I'll get in because this is who I want to be, this is my big goal. And when do I go, oh, the universe is telling me no, or that is a hard one that I wrestle with all the time. Like, what is important? What am I willing to do? Or how long am I willing to wait? Or how hard am I willing to work on something that feels like it's not happening right now? And that's when self-compassion and patience, as you said, is so crucial.
Like, you remind me of something so important, that flexibility that's comes from what you're talking about now, being able to reframe your setbacks and be flexible and adaptable as you perhaps are having to wait, or you are having to kind of take a slightly different route through, the idea and the visualization that you might have set in terms of who you are, right, that changes, and so often we're just expected to just move on so quickly. But I think there's an element of grieving that actually comes from that, right? And it's a tough thing, and people will not necessarily take that seriously because you haven't lost a family member, or you haven't lost, but there are these goals that you've set for yourself, and this like vision that you've had. There's a special word I want to use here, and I can't think of it off the top of my head, but anyway, it'll come to me. But you've got this visualization of who you wanted to be, and now that's changed, and you no longer have that as an option, and you're going to have to grieve. I mean, you might not go through all the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grieving, but you're going to feel some sadness about it. I remember I'd applied for clinical psychology for a good number of years, thinking that was the stream that I wanted to go into. And it was through a course coordinator at one of the universities that said to me, stop applying for the clinical program. Like, don't you see the work that you're doing with the community of students? You're better suited as a counseling psychologist. And I said, no, man, this guy's, I'm gonna still be a clinical psychologist. I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna point my finger in your face and prove you wrong, right? But over time, that little earworm kind of settled, and I started seeing myself more as a counseling psychologist, and starting to realize that some of the strengths and values that I held within my personal space, could actually come to fruition in that space much better than in a clinical space. And I still found myself occasionally saying, like, oh, like in my head, like, you're Dylan Benyon, you're going to be a clinical psychologist. But then that changed at some point, and it almost became like these Freudian slips that I would make when I said counseling psychologist, when I had the opportunity to then train. And I realized at that point, like, I hadn't let go of Dylan Benyon, the clinical psychologist, and then received and accepted Dylan as the counseling psychologist. So I just sat one day and I journaled out, and I wrote down everything that I needed to put out, and kind of to let that go then, and say, okay, this is my process of letting go that version of who you thought you were going to be. And you're not any less for not being that. In fact, you're a step up, and you need to start seeing yourself as that, because you found your niche, you found a space that's right for you. So yeah, I mean, I think some people might say, like, oh, that's a bit of a weird, like bold statement to make there, Dylan, that it's a grieving process when you don't get to, live out the goal that you want. But sometimes these things are so steadfast in us that it feels like, you've lost this opportunity to be something else that you've wanted to be for so long, especially if it's something you've been working for years and years and years.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Well, I'm glad. I just kind of came up on the spot. No, I'm teasing. I wrote a paper on this at one stage a long time ago, and that's why I can't remember that word. There's a special word that speaks about these things. But anyway, I'll text it to you guys later.
Leave it in the comments for later. I kind of imagine myself as like these versions of Daniel that, like, I've killed, or like I've shedded his skin or whatever, and there's a new version that emerges. In my mind, a better version, with new wants and new dreams and new goals at each sort of like stage of life, or with each turn of the river. My fiance says I use too many analogies or metaphors.
You'd make an excellent narrative therapist. It's fine.
Oh, thank you. Positive feedback from someone, at least. It is a grieving process, and I think on the flip side, there's also a really exciting side of that new adventure of change, this new version of you that you're creating constantly. If you spend the time, like you said, with journaling, or there's many ways to do this introspection of where do I want to go. But I think something that I struggle with, and a lot of people struggle with, is like, when do you draw the line? When do you say, oh, this isn't the thing that was important for me? Because, like, you don't want to frame it as giving up, right? Like, or that the universe said no, and I'll never be this thing, and I'll never be happy, because that's very self-defeating. So where do you go? Oh, maybe because you, like, I guess in a way, are lucky that you got into uh, your program. Not to take anything away from your achievements and what you've done and whatever, but there's always an element of luck in life. And there's equally people who'll be watching this be like, oh man, I wish, and frustrated, and I eventually changed direction, and now I'm unhappy, and I always wanted to be that thing. That can also be a really tough place to be in. And I think it's some of the perspectives I've heard from people around setting goals. I had a discussion with one of my friend's moms, and he was like, no, I don't believe in goals. I don't set goals because, like, if they don't come true or they don't happen or whatever, you're just going to be disappointed. So just live life and kind of go with the flow. And I hear that, I do.
Sure.
But there are things everyone wants in life, and you might not call them goals, and you might not be deliberate about how you work towards them. But she's married, and she has 2 kids, and she's achieved a lot of things in her career, which she's obviously are amazing. And I'm like, those kind of were goals, even if you didn't label them as such. And maybe would have celebrated them more and be more deliberate in how you go about them if you had set them as goals. But it's interesting people's different perspectives on it. And to some people, like, goal setting, it's like, shut up, smart goals, ugh, yuck. But for me, it was something that really helped change my life for the better. And it was the collection of that self-reflection of what's important, and then setting goals in those areas to make progress. Because I had this mentor um, from Australia, and he was like, okay, so you say these things are important to you, but what are you doing to make progress towards it? If you say, oh, I want a family and a dog and 2 kids, it's like, but at the time I was single and I wasn't spending time and finding somebody who'd be good for me. And he was like, well, is it important to you? Oh, damn, you got me good.
Right in the heart there, prof.
Yeah, exactly. So the goals gave me a map in a way to make sure that it was moving in a direction that was important to me, and to be able to adjust course when things weren't going so well. And I've started applying it now on a sort of larger scale. Well, maybe large scale is not the right word, but I set goals with my partner, which has actually become such a cool thing. So at the end of last year, beginning of this year, we got a big piece of paper out, and we're like, okay, what are these different areas of our life, and what things do we want to do together? So, for example, we obviously want to get married. So, and you might think, like, oh, is that a goal, Daniel? But it is for me in a way. It's something super important. So it's about seeing different wedding venues, or another goal is we want to get into cycling and cycle 100 kilometers. Things that otherwise, if we didn't set these goals and sort of implement them, I feel like we wouldn't achieve or do in life. And that's been so additive to my life. And I guess that's why I encourage people to set goals, because it's really changed my life for the better.
Yeah, I'm with you. We did a very similar thing beginning of the year, myself and my wife. We on the 1st, we went for a walk together, and that was essentially like our New Year's resolution walk. And we set there were goals for the 2 of us to work together, similar like what you've done with your fiance as well. And it was just so lovely. It was such an impactful moment for me as well, because in the back of my mind, I mean, yes, I occasionally will journal out my thoughts and, put them down on paper, but a lot of it is just kind of kept within. I know what I'm working towards, and I do my best to kind of keep sight on it. But it was then nice to hear, what my wife wants to do with the next year of her life, and what we will do together. And it's like it was simple things like eat healthier, and those things. We want to take care of ourselves. We want to spend as much of the rest of our lives together, healthy and alive. So yeah, it was very nice. I kind of wish that we did have a big board up in front of us so that we could say, okay, cool, let's define that. Maybe that's what we'll do at some point, but I think I've seen the benefit of it as well. It's something that got me to setting goals is what got me to where I am now. I've seen my life fall apart previously because I was setting goals on things that weren't valuable to me, that weren't necessarily realistic, just teenage angst and a lot of like naivete, so yeah, I think that kind of segues into the next section a little bit as well. Hey, I think we're talking about our personal journeys a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the other values in setting goals is that you can invite people in. If you've articulated it quite clearly, you can then go to your partner, you can go to your family and your friends and be like, oh, by the way, I have this goal. Do you want to do it with me? And I had the privilege of running the marathon last year with two of my friends. And I think a lot of people don't want to tell people about their goals because, like, oh, what if I don't succeed and don't make it? Then there's all this embarrassment or shame or whatever. But I think it robs you of being able to share the progress and the journey and invite people in. They could help you, they could support you, they could join you. And I think a life shared and shared goals and life is a full one. And without setting those goals and being clear and articulate on them, that your chance of doing that is much smaller.
No, I'm with you 100%. Leaning on support, I think, is what gets a lot of people through their goals. But I guess at times there are goals that you will set for yourself and that you don't necessarily want to bring too many people into it. And then I guess it's up to personal preference how you do that. If you want to go and put onto, social media on the 1st of January to say, hey, I'm running the flippin' New York Marathon on the 1st of February, and you haven't trained a day through December, and when you fail, people are going to be like, hey, bro, how did that marathon go? Hey, so you got to pick and choose how you do it. I've done that, been very selective as to who I've brought into those spaces at times in my life. And those people were then important in terms of being my support while I was trying to achieve that. And they also knew the fact that, maybe it's not going to work out, but they were going to be my support if it doesn't work out as well. So you have to be a little bit picky and choosy when it comes to these sort of things. But I do like that. I don't think there's ever been a goal that I've set for myself that I haven't brought somebody else into, that's remained completely private and completely for me. I've always, we need help, and sometimes you've got to kind of reach out and ask for it. No one's just going to suck it out of your brain. So I think it is nice to have somebody around and to facilitate for some of the things. You'll be surprised at how much further you might be able to go when somebody takes your hand or you take somebody's hand and you walk that path together.
Yeah. What's that African proverb? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Lovely.
Yeah. And I completely agree with you. I mean, like, I'm not advocating that you should post all your goals on Facebook or LinkedIn and be like, this is what I'm going to do with these dates. I mean, if you want to, I think there's a good power in it. It can keep you honest. It can force you to kind of prioritize it, even when times are tough and it's raining and you don't want to go out, it's cold, you don't want to work on that goal. So there is a lot of power in it. And I think there's platforms, as an example, like LinkedIn, where articulating your vision or your goals and putting it out there could probably give you a lot of opportunity. Like, people can be like, oh, wow, I want to support you on this thing. So I guess it goes in like two extremes. Like, there's these deeply personal things that you don't want to share, and other career or aspirations that sharing could bring a lot of strength and value to. We're starting to run out of time here.
Who would have thought, like, a talk on goals take a full hour and a bit,
I know, what a surprise.
Yeah.
I guess one of the things that we just want to kind of cover as we start wrapping up is that there's many ways to track your goals and make progress on them. You can do it the old pen and paper way. You can get apps. There's tons of different strategies. And to sort of sell ourselves a little bit, that's kind of what we try to help people do at Psyche Innovations through our mental health app, Psyche Mental Health. If you are sort of curious about setting goals and learning more details about how to set intelligent goals, we have skills that focus on that skill. Go check it out. And we've also built a goal setting feature that helps you set goals in the different domains and make a big goal with smaller sub goals and make it a bit more gamified and fun to do. So I really do encourage you to go check it out. But if you find other resources that work just as well, I'm super happy. That's still a win. So I'd just like to thank you all for joining us. And of course, to Dylan for giving his time against probably his fiance and his burnout and better judgment. But it's been an absolute pleasure, Dylan. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, no, thank you, Daniel, for having me. I really, really appreciate this. It's been really nice to kind of just, have this discussion and let it kind of flow out quite naturally. And hopefully there's been a couple of people out there that have seen how, both Daniel and I have benefited from setting goals. And if it's not something that you've done in the past, give it a try. Try it in an area that, you don't necessarily care too much about, right? Or see if you can make progress somewhere like that and you can achieve a goal outside of your main area of focus. Imagine what you can do when you put that focus together, right? And you do it in that area or that domain that is so important to you. Give it a go. See where you get to.
100%. And if you have some cool goals and you want to comment them below and get our input or support from the community, I encourage you to do that. And yeah, thanks again, Dylan. Please go check out Cognition & Co. They do a whole lot of really cool stuff as well. Workshops, trainings. Go check out his new website. It's awesome. So yeah, thanks again. And we'll catch you in the next one. Cheers, everyone.